Hi, folks. Welcome back. So, 2026 is shaping up to be a very interesting year in terms of the protocols used for AI agents. And today I want to take a look at the protocols that are being proposed for agentic commerce, because already we're seeing a bit of a tussle in terms of the big players proposing different protocols. In some sense, this really reminds me of the early days of the web, the early 2000s, when you had this giant war between Internet Explorer and Mozilla, and all these browsers had slightly different implementations of the HTML and JavaScript and CSS specs. And it was really hard on web developers because you had to actually write code that checked which browser you were running on and then do things differently or render things differently. And I'm afraid we might be going into a similar era when it comes to the protocols around AI agents. So let's look at what's happening. Looking specifically at agentic commerce, so buying things on the web with AI agents. Google recently, just a day or two ago, announced their protocol. They call it Universal Commerce Protocol, UCP. It was announced at NRF, National Retail Forum. And it has a bunch of big e-commerce names that they co-developed it with, which is very significant, of course. And it has support from all the major payment processors as well. And this is an open protocol. They have a GitHub repo and a website with an official spec. And it is a very complete protocol in the sense that it tackles all the stages of the buying lifecycle, starting all the way from discovering what products you have to checking out and account and identity management. On the other side of the ring, back in September 2025, OpenAI partnered with Stripe to announce their own agentic commerce protocol, ACP. And while the protocol itself is neutral and not tied to any provider, they partnered with Stripe on the implementation. And currently, Stripe is the only payment provider that supports this protocol. In terms of merchants, they partnered with Shopify, which again is significant because Shopify has over 1 million merchants on their platform. But in contrast to UCP, ACP is very focused on just one step of the buying process, and that is the checkout part of it. So if you look at the protocol spec, it talks only about exchanging payment tokens and the protocol going back and forth when the user has decided to buy something and pay for it. So it is not as complete a protocol as UCP. And this table summarizes the big differences between these two protocols. Like I was saying, UCP is much more complete compared to ACP. The other big difference really is how they treat identity and auth. Because in ACP, every checkout is essentially stateless, whereas UCP from Google talks about using OAuth in a first-class manner. And what that means is that the agent driving this entire life cycle has much more visibility into the store itself. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So you see this competition brewing between the big players. Google, of course, is proposing UCP. OpenAI is coming in with ACP. Microsoft has its own thing going with Copilot checkout. And of course, the giant 800-pound gorilla that's kind of absent from either UCP or ACP is Amazon. From Amazon's strategic point of view, they don't want to adopt any of these protocols because they're essentially protocols proposed by their competitors. They would like to own the entire vertical walled garden experience, and that's exactly what they're trying to do with their own agents like Rufus and Alexa Plus. So if you're hooked into the Amazon ecosystem, they can essentially let you buy whatever you want using Amazon's own agents and Amazon's own merchants and goods and fulfillment and everything else. And they even have a buy for me agent which will shop websites outside Amazon. So they are making their own parallel proprietary play. So let's come back to identity for a bit because this is important in terms of the functionality offered by these agents and these protocols. So, like I said, UCP has OAuth 2 built in where the user can grant permission to the agent to log into the merchant or the payment provider with their OAuth credentials. On the other hand, ACP only has guest checkout, so it's not allowed to share state between the provider and the agent. What does this mean in practice? In practice, what this means is if I have an agent that is trying to buy something with UCP and I give it OAuth permissions to look into my merchant's account, the agent can then find out much more about my merchant account, like my previous purchases, my preferences, my discount codes, or my gift cards, and so on. So it has a much more complete picture of what I want to buy and how I want to buy it. And I can say things like buy my usual order of diapers or something like that, and I don't have to spell out the brand name. So if using OAuth 2, the UCP agent can look into my merchant's account and see what brand of diapers I usually order. It can take that natural language intent and order the right thing, whereas you can't do that with ACP. Of course, there's a trade-off here. It means that ACP is much more private because it's sharing much lesser information between the merchant and the agent. UCP is sharing much more information between those two parties, the trade-off being it's also giving you much richer functionality. Now, what about adoption? ACP is ahead because, like I said, it came out in September 2025 and it is live now. It has integration with Etsy, with Shopify. So it is live and it is in production. On the other hand, UCP was just announced right now. It's just a spec. We haven't seen any real world production deployments. But people like Target and Shopify and Walmart are pretty big merchants that have thrown their weight behind UCP. It's interesting to see Shopify hedge their bets with both Google and OpenAI. Now, you can play out the prognostication game about how this will play out, who will win this protocol war. But again, going back to the early days of the web, eventually what settled the protocol war for the web was not standardization because there were standards, but it was basically just market might. What it took was for Chrome to build and put out a new free browser and for it to gain the majority market share. And Chrome did a really great job at following standards and not making their own proprietary forks to standards. And eventually everyone just got behind the Chrome engine. Right now, all this is a bit up in the air, but I suspect as agents become more mainstream, as doing commerce with agents becomes more mainstream, it will become important to have a broadly adopted protocol, whether it's standardized or not, regardless of which large player is pushing it, because developers really need that. Otherwise, developers are going to be stuck in that same bad pattern of having to write conditional code for all these different protocols from the different providers. So let's hope that happens soon. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. If you like content like this, consider subscribing, like the video, and I will see you next time. Thanks.